Although Putin is, I'm afraid, the most despicable man, and he lies and is willing to do anything, I don't think he's stupid enough to start having a war against NATO. If you
Yes.
think of all the NATO forces and you pull them together, with I don't know, 400,000 Poles, 400,000 Russians, I mean, them in their own military, 150,000 in Sweden, 100,000 in Finland. We're talking immense numbers of men, and
Yes.
I don't think we want to get too trapped in thinking we've got to have huge numbers of men.
The Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, said the Royal Navy is preparing to step in to replace USS Dwight D. Eisenhower when that carrier returns to America. Let's welcome to the programme Admiral Lord West of Spithead. Hello to you, Anna.
Good evening, John. Good evening.
Good of you to join us. Tell me what your thoughts on this. Not many people will know, and I think have more thoughts on this than you. A Royal Navy carrier is a big increase in the scale of British commitment, isn't it? We're talking about as powerful an asset as we possess. I mean, maybe barring Trident nuclear boats.
Yes, it's a very powerful asset. I personally believe we should have deployed one earlier, but there are reasons why that couldn't happen. Not very good reasons, some of them, and they'll have to rectify those if they're going to deploy a carrier now. But the carrier has got all sorts of potential that we can't have with other units, and we're there to protect innocent shipping. And there's no doubt that if you've got your air wing on board a carrier, the aircraft are better at shooting down missiles than ships are. They're able to cover a much bigger area. They're also much better at carrying out attacks should you want to do an attack.
Yes.
And doing it again and again and again, rather than, as we did, flying a small handful of aircraft, 1,500 miles with two tankers, getting overflying rights, and goodness knows what. The carriers have got this great joy. They can be out at sea. They don't have to ask anyone's beck and call, and they can provide this power unexpectedly and unseen.
Yes, I mean, I guess the range of its power as well as the volume of power is really formidable. We're talking about, a great deal more air power. We're talking about missile capacity. We are talking about, well, even a capacity to put boots on the ground, Alan.
It could possibly, but you wouldn't want to put the aircraft carrier in close inshore. One of the great things, people talk about vulnerability of carriers. They're actually one of the least vulnerable of any asset. And part of the reason is you don't bring them close inshore. You keep them well out to sea, and they use the legs of their aircraft to do things. But yes, she could possibly carry troops. But I think the last thing we ought to do or want to do is get any troops involved in
Yes.
In the Yemen. Indeed, it's interesting. The first place I ever fought was in Yemen, being shot at and shooting people in 1967. So Yemen's been at this for quite a long time, haven't they, in various ways?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a massive step, which is not in contemplation. But the range is relevant. I mean, the aircraft carrier, the Royal Navy aircraft carrier, would be capable of making a significant contribution to strikes as and when they come in Yemen against the Houthi rebels. But of course, and what else could it do? I mean, could it be engaged in action on the Lebanon border of Syria? Oh, sorry, the Lebanon border of Israel, or even in Syria, that sort of thing.
I mean, almost inevitably, the carrier would be deployed into the Indian Ocean and down in the Gulf of Aden, down in that region. But of course, it's got the flexibility then to flex across towards the Gulf, Iran, very very quickly. The great joy of a carrier can move 400 to 500 miles a day without anyone's beck and call, or it can just do as it wants, and that is an amazing capability. And the Americans understand how important carriers are, as we know. Indeed, a lot of nations do. That's why there are carrier programs in China, India, Korea, Japan, and other countries. They understand how powerful they are. And the Americans always wanted us to have these carriers. They were very desperate because the number of carrier battle groups they've got has reduced, and they saw us as being a nation that they could work with who would be able to put a carrier in place of one of theirs. And that might be what's being discussed at the moment for our carrier to replace the Eisenhower, and quite likely, I'd have thought, if we did that, there would be American F-35Bs on board our carrier, because
Yes.
one of the problems we have is we have not actually generated the air wings for the carriers as quickly as we should have done.
Yes.
And that is a major error that we have made.
Yeah, well, we become the airfield in the Red Sea for the coalition of the willing. Can I just shift to Russia just for a moment? I wonder what you think about building Britain's capacity to put boots on the ground in the event of war with Russia. You know, General Sanders, the chief of the General Staff, is now talking about offering paid training to youngsters during their gap year. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, I do think the army is probably too small. And I think one way of actually bulking the army up is using volunteers and effectively reservists. And there's a lot of scope for that, I believe. And I think it's quite good for the men and women involved in doing that as well. Actually, it's they get good training and that's useful stuff. But some of the figures that are being quoted, I think, are a little bit surprising. And the other thing is, although Putin is, I'm afraid, the most despicable man, and he lies and is willing to do anything, I don't think he's stupid enough to start having a war against NATO. If you think of all the NATO forces and you pull them together, with, I don't know, 400,000 Poles, 400,000 Russians, I mean, them in their own military, 150,000 in Sweden, 100,000 in Finland. We're talking immense numbers of men.
Yes.
And I don't think we want to get too trapped in thinking we've got to have huge numbers of men.
Yes, and I mean, given the man and women power of NATO countries combined, it does mean that conscription, which was discussed in the course of conversation last week, that's a non-starter, surely, isn't it? There's just no need to even contemplate that.
I think it would not be something that's very helpful for the military. Once you have conscription, you have to have a huge training machine. It costs you a massive amount of money, and I think it would be very difficult. I think it's different if there were God forbid, that if there were a world war, obviously the nation has to strain every sinew in every area possible, and there would obviously have to be some, people would be being used for all sorts of things, and it's all very difficult, I think, in our modern world for us even to contemplate that. The sort of things that had to be done at the beginning of the Second World War, I think would be mind-boggling today. But of course, that's a very different situation from the situation, I think, that the Chief of General Staff was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, there is a problem with recruitment, though, isn't there? I was seeing just a few days ago in your service, Alan, that the Royal Navy was having to look to LinkedIn to find a rear admiral or a retired rear admiral to take charge of the submarine fleet.
Yes, I mean, there is absolutely a problem with manpower and recruiting. I mean, these things do happen. They do go up and down, particularly when there's very good good employment. It's a problem. I think that particular recruiting of someone from outside, they were really after someone who had done all the various jobs and had been a military man. And of course, it fits in with some of the studies that have gone on about people going backwards and forwards into the military and into defence industries and back out again. And I understand to an extent there are some good ideas there, but overall I don't really like that. And I think the way that they have adjusted our way of managing senior officers and it's true and the same in the civil service, has made it quite difficult to guarantee getting the people you really want, who you've really looked at, who've done all the right jobs, into the slots you need. It's a lovely panacea to say, oh yes, this is great. We he's such a good chap that he can do anything. That's not always the case. I was sounded out after I'd left the military. I was sounded out, didn't go very far. Did I want to be Commissioner of the Met? And I said, I certainly bloody well didn't want to be, because I knew nothing about it. But the idea is, oh, it's a change and it's going to be refreshing. I'm not always so convinced about that.
I've got to say, I hadn't heard that story before, Alan. You were approached to be the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. When was that?
Well, that was in 2006.
That's not so very long ago. I mean, can you share who made the approach?
And I'm not going to go into it any more than that. I've probably said more than I should. Okay. Anyway, I didn't want to do it, so it was very easy and straightforward.
You didn't fancy being a cop?
I don't think I'd have been very popular with all of the senior police.
Right. Alan, really great to talk to you as always. Admiral Lord West of Spithead there.